Hey everybody, it's Wes from 4x4 Canada. We got one more throwback episode here for you this week. Then Trisha and I are back full time and ready to rock out the next season here for you guys. We took a couple weeks break just to sort of chillax. And fortunately, Trisha was a little sick and I was just, what the hell was I? I was just done. To be honest with you. So we took a couple weeks and we're back up to where we should be. We're strong, we're powerful, and we're ready to bring everything back out for you guys. So this is the last of our throwback for a little while. And this one is going back to September 2022. It was my interview with Ken from Wild Med Kids. And it was an episode that I really looked forward to because at that point in time, I needed a first aid kit. And I didn't know what to do. Do I go to Walmart and grab some stuff? Do I go to Costco, get one of their kits, whatever? So I reached out to Ken and said, hey, I need something. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I need. And he decided to come on the show and talk about it with me. And I learned a lot of stuff. Not only does Ken sell the first aid kits, but he also is a nurse. And he also teaches survival first aid courses as well in Ontario. So not only does he have the product, but he has the knowledge to back that product up. And to be honest with you, that's what we talked about a lot through this episode was, you can have band-aids or splints or whatever, but what happens when you get that hypothermia? What happens when you are out in the middle of nowhere and you trip and you sprain an ankle and stuff like that? So there's a lot of those questions were rolling around in my head. You take your regular first aid course, and all they tell you is how to call somebody and how to give CPR, which is wonderful to know, but it doesn't give you any help for real life situations. It's more by the book kind of idea. So I'm really looking forward to bringing this episode back. I just listened to it again, and I'll be honest with you, I learned so much more again listening to it the second time. So even if you did listen to this 2 years ago, it's worth listening to it again just to bring that knowledge back up to you, because we do forget it. If we don't use it, we do forget this knowledge, right? So it's worth a listen. And Trisha and I'll be back next week with some new episodes for you. In the meantime, let's listen to Ken from Wild Med Kits. Also, I'm going to throw it out there. If you go to wildmedkits.ca and use the 4x4 Canada code at checkout, you get a 10% discount. Us at 4x4 Canada do not get any kickbacks on this. This is not an affiliate. This is just a savings that Ken has put out for the members of the 4x4 Canada family. And we really appreciate Ken doing that for us. And let's support these local companies and these small Canadian businesses, because if we keep on supporting and buying our first aid stuff through Amazon or Walmart, etc., these small companies are not going to be there anymore. And these are the guys that support us in the industry. So please support these small local companies, and we know that they really appreciate it. So once again, here is my interview from 2022 with Ken from Wild Med Kits. Talk to you soon. First aid kits are something everybody should have in every vehicle and in their house. Today we talk about first aid kits and first aid training and other situations. Our guest today has been a nurse for many years as well as a trainer and saw a market for good quality first aid kit. I found it to be a really interesting episode in that I learned a lot. And stick around to the end for a discount code for first aid kits and supplies. Are you into four-wheeling, camping, and exploring? How about off-road racing like mud bogs, short course wheel-to-wheel racing, or even desert races? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to 4x4 Canada podcast. My name is Wes, and I've been four-wheeling since I was 6 weeks old. I have over 20 years experience in 4x4 shops, many more than that in the off-road racing, and a lifetime of exploring the backcountry across Canada. Every week we bring you a new guest where they give you their perspective on the industry. We discuss everything from four-wheeling, overlanding, every form of off-road racing across this great country, as well as we talk to Canadian manufacturers and 4x4 shops. Just a quick reminder that if you're looking for more episodes, you can find all of our episodes on 4x4canadapodcast.com or your favorite podcast sharing platform. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at 4x4canadapodcast.com. Now let's get to the show. Most of us have first aid kits in their vehicle. If not, you should. when you look at the kit in your truck, it probably has a few cheap Band-Aids, maybe some tweezers and gauze, and oh yeah, that Advil that expired 2 years ago. Will your current kit help or hinder you in an actual emergency? As outdoor enthusiasts, we spend a lot of time outside in the wilderness. Our guest today can help make sure that you are prepared for whatever first aid emergencies thrown your way. Ken, welcome to the 4x4 Canada podcast.
Thanks for having me, Wes.
So Ken is the owner of Wild Med Kits, a Canadian company that supplies first aid kits and supplies. You can check out their website at www.wildmedkits.ca, and we'll put that link in the show notes, of course. Ken, please tell us about yourself and Wild Med Kits.
Sure. Yeah, so my professional background is working as a registered nurse. I've been practicing since 2010, and I spent most of my career working in austere environments, so working in the Arctic, in First Nations communities and outposts, as well as doing some flight nursing in Nunavut. And then I've worked emergency rooms, ICUs in the city here as well. And then I've been mostly focusing my kind of latter part of my career on education. So I've been teaching nursing with a few universities and colleges, and then teaching privately with first aid programs, with wilderness first aid, emergency medical responder courses, as well as the general kind of first aid CPR programs. And that's where I really enjoyed kind of the educational side and kind of sharing my professional knowledge with everybody out there and trying to get more people trained up so they have some knowledge of what to do when no one trained is around. So I think that's really helpful. And then in the side of the supply side, this really came out of just teaching for, the last 10, 12 years. Is we did a lot of courses, and people would always ask about first aid kits at the end. And yep. I was always trying to kind of direct people as to where to go. Mech's got some kits there, and you can check kind of local stores. But as we looked into it, the kits that are kind of off the shelf and ready really didn't have, what we're training them to do. And we'd look at the curriculum and go, we just taught you how to do all this stuff, and you don't even have that in a basic first aid kit. So that kind of sparked the idea of starting this company, and it took a while to develop. We launched it in 2017, and it's been running quite well and growing year by year with that. And we work with like search and rescue organizations, campus emergency response teams. We work with a lot of guiding companies, and we really kind of niched into doing custom kits and first aid kits, yep. more for people that needed something specific for an environment that wasn't kind of your standard environment. So that's where we really kind of niched out in our product line.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked you to come on the show is that I have questions, and I'm sure that the listeners have a lot of the same questions when it comes to first aid kits. I mentioned to you earlier in the week that, when I sold my Xterra, I forgot to take out the first aid kit and the lift gate there. And now I need a new first aid kit. My old kit was a mix mash of stuff I bought from the drugstores and Band-Aids and just regular stuff, right? But I've been thinking about what to do for a kit. Do I get a $30 kit from Costco and top it up with a few things? Do I get an empty bag and make my own kit, or buy a proper kit that's pre-done? There's, going through your website, I'm like, okay, that just pretty much solves that question. Some of these pre-done kits have everything I need, and it saves me running around in different stores. And it's actual quality stuff. It's not Band-Aids that are going to fall off and stuff like that. For the outdoor enthusiasts like our listeners, your wilderness kits would probably be a really good fit, or even the hard shell survival and first aid kit that you've got. But maybe we can talk a second about those wilderness kits.
Sure. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think we face this question all the time of, should I buy an off the shelf kit and kind of supplement? Yep. Or just buy a really nice bag and kind of create my own. And I think it's really specific to kind of where people are at the time. I think, first aid kits can get expensive. So, as you yep. add the big stuff like a quality tourniquet is not a cheap device to add to it. So I get people have kind of a budgetary piece to it. So I don't think there's a wrong way to go about it. I think generally as people get more training, which I think is probably the biggest thing to do, is get some education and kind of skill set towards first aid, because I think a lot of the general information that's available online is tough to kind of suss out what is reputable and what is not. So that really kind of guides, and that's when I'm teaching kind of a first aid course, I have students reflect at the end, like the skills that we did, and use that skill set to kind of dictate the supplies you're going to need. So I think that's a really helpful kind of lens to look at your first aid kit. So if you have a pre-made one from wherever, go through it and take a look at that stuff and see if it actually matches the skill set you think you may be applying to that situation. I would say if you do, like, I've used those Costco kits before. They have an okay bag, like it's got some organizational structure to it. I just pulled it up here actually to look at it too. And it's very similar to any kit you'll find at like Shoppers Drug Mart or Walmart or anything.
Right.
I think their biggest basis is like they always state I've got 200 like supplies in it or whatever, and the vast majority will be Band-Aids and swabs and things.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge in like emergency situations is you get kind of lost in like the fluff, the filler, and it's tough to find what you need when you need it. So I would say a lot of that is I would pull out a lot of the junk that I don't need there and really add the products that are going to be useful for it. So in our like wilderness kits, we spent a long time developing that, and actually we came out with 3 levels now, which I think is really helpful. So we have a pocket size, kind of the essential and the comprehensive, and the idea was like a pocket wilderness kit really came from like me having a kid now. So I've got a 4-year-old and, we're at the park all the time doing things, and I've got loads of first aid kits around, but if I'm at the park, it's not necessarily on me. And, just the multiple falls and scrapes and things where I'm like, oh, we don't have anything to clean you. We'll do it when we get back to the car. Kind of really sussed out this idea of having a pocket kit. So it's got a little bit of everything to kind of get you by at the moment. And the idea was to make something small enough that you'd be willing to carry it all the time, because really the best first aid kit is the one that's with you.
Yeah.
That's always going to be the biggest thing. And we made it fully waterproof. So we got these lock sack bags, which are pretty awesome. They're made in the States, and they're fully submersible, like bulletproof Ziplocs, basically. You can stomp on them. They're puncture resistant. So if you throw it in the wash with your clothes, it still survives. And we've done quite a bit of testing with them. So we really like the bag that it's in, and it keeps like your stuff. If you're getting sweaty in your pocket, it's not going to destroy your first aid gear. So I think that's really helpful.
And if you're on a kayak and you have capsize or whatever, right?
100%.
If it gets wet, it's still usable.
Exactly, and that's a challenge. A lot of your first aid stuff doesn't do well when it's wet. Right, all the packaging and the sterility and the adhesives just don't do well when they're soaking wet. So keeping it dry is a really key thing. And our next level, kind of that essential kit, was a bigger kit that you can kind of throw in a day pack or something, to have really to kind of treat at least yourself and maybe one other person. So it's a smaller kit with a little bit of everything. And then we have our comprehensive kit, which is a really good one for kind of overall treating anything you would kind of face out there. You've got enough to do multiple injuries. It's got a good organizational structure, and then we left some space to kind of add into it, because one of the things in Canada that's a restriction in first aid kits is medications. So in the US, you'll see a lot of like prepackaged single dose medications in their kits, and Health Canada doesn't allow us to sell products that way here in Canada. So that's always something you're going to have to add to a kit, and it's just an interesting restriction with the way we have our legal system here. So having some space in there to add, general medications like Advil, Tylenol, Benadryl, some cream, polysporin, exactly. We wanted to leave that there, and we actually included in that kit our medication guide. So that was a guide I developed going through all the over-the-counter medications, how you would use them, what I'd suggest stocking, what to be cautious of with using those drugs. So it's a good kind of list and guide to think about what drugs you might bring with you. And especially as you're doing longer trips, those symptom management drugs are going to make your life a lot happier and allow you to maybe stay on a trip you would have decided to exit on otherwise. So that's a good kind of additional piece to think about when building those.
Yeah. And that kit, I was looking at that one myself. It's like you say, it's fairly comprehensive, fairly involved, and covers pretty much everything you need. And it's really a perfect car kit, for lack of better terms, for those people, that are going out into the bush and the wilderness. And of course, you never want to have to use, the first aid kit. And, I think in my old one, I used a couple Band-Aids and that was it. But it's just that safety aspect of feeling better when you're going out, because you're prepared for whatever may happen. Because what I've found in my life is that quite often stuff happens when I'm not prepared.
Right.
Right. So, chances are, if I do have a good quality kit, I may not need it. But usually, when shit goes wrong, is when I don't have a kit or something.
Completely
So the
agree. And
base,
yeah, we have a lot of students reflect on that when we do our first aid courses, because I think when we bring in someone that has done no training before, they don't really realize like what could happen. And then we do the
yep,
training and they go, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. And it really kind of adds to that idea of like, I probably should have been more prepared for these trips I've been doing for years. And you're right,
yep,
generally nothing happens. I totally agree. It's very rare that I'm pulling out some, big trauma piece out of my kit. I'm definitely using Band-Aids quite frequently, just like
yep,
everyone else. But the challenge is when something big happens, it gets a lot harder when you need to improvise those pieces, especially if you're not practiced in that improvisation piece. And it's
yep.
much faster if you have the right gear, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
I think you're right on that one.
Now let's actually, bounce into that training part. You mentioned that you do training, and we were talking with some friends yesterday. We were out in the Alpine, mentioning that that you're coming on board today, and I'm in BC, in the middle of BC, and there's absolutely nothing for wilderness training here. I've done the first aid kit, like your St. John's, level
Yeah.
1, and done that numerous times. But what we all were kind of discussing yesterday is that, not that they're useless, but those courses, they're like 90% of it is CPR and defibrillator, and
100%. Yeah.
5 or 10% is actually dealing with something that we might find in the bush.
Yep.
And not that, CPR is obviously, that's very important, but like that 5 or 10%, the rest of it's just spent on how to put a Band-Aid, kind of idea, right?
Yep.
So, I've been wanting to do some wilderness training. Unfortunately, I got to go to basically Vancouver to do that, but
Right.
and that's something I'm going to look at, trying to maybe bring somebody up into the Kamloops area to do
Yeah.
a training like that. With the courses that you do in Ontario, what's the difference between like a basic or a level 1 and the wilderness training courses?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, first aid course levels are complicated for sure. And provincially, things change. And Alberta and BC particularly have these like levels, which we don't have here in Ontario. So, like the OFA level
Oh,
one,
okay.
2, 3, it's not a thing here for us. So, I know that complicates a lot of confusion around naming. In general terms, like what you mentioned with the St. John Ambulance or Red Cross is kind of the standard first aid, we'll call it. And you're
Yeah.
right. That's majority is CPR, because really that course focuses on what does someone need to do in the 10 minutes waiting for an ambulance, and what
Yeah.
things should they call an ambulance for. That's really the goal out of that course, is recognizing, oh my goodness, someone needs an ambulance, so call it. And then what are the things that have great benefit being done prior to an ambulance arrival, which really is CPR, right? That's one of the things that if it's not done by bystanders, by the time EMS arrives, it has a much poorer success rate than if we had bystander CPR. So that's always been kind of the focus of those courses. When we get into like wilderness remote first aid, then it really switches that lens, because the whole idea of that course is nobody's coming soon. So
Exactly.
you're stuck here for, at least a few hours, if not days. What can you do in that time to keep someone alive? Right. So it's really that lens change that kind of, I think, really fits with, overlanders, those that are doing wilderness tripping or any sort of remote expedition stuff. Even a lot of our roadways in Canada, right? You can be pretty far away from major towns and EMS response. Yep. So that's really the focus of that one is, the hospital's not going to be here. We're going to need to do some more intense things. And really the scope of practice changes on that as well. So we talk a lot more about medications and what meds would be safe to give, how to dose them, because there's going to be no one's going to be able to do those. A lot more into like wound management. So like you mentioned, like just throwing on a Band-Aid, maybe people know how to do that, but we need to do really good aggressive wound cleaning. We need to change those bandages. We need to watch for infection. So we do a lot more training on that and how to manage different types of wounds, as well as splinting, because that's probably your other biggest kind of most common thing, is someone falling down and injuring, a wrist, an ankle, that kind of thing. So we have a lot more in-depth assessment of deciding, do you think that thing's fractured or not? How are you going to protect it? how can you keep this thing stable while you're moving your patient towards an evacuation that may be multiple hours or days? How do you monitor that injury? And then with that, it's patient transport is a big thing too. Right? In our standard first aid, it's all about just leave them there and help's coming. Just call 911 and sit down and calm down. But in our remote courses, it's really that EMS is probably not going to get exactly to where you are. You may need to do at least a short movement, and we want to do that safely. So we get a lot more into stabilizing fractures, building stretchers, doing proper lifts, organizing a team for an evacuation, kind of thinking about how we're going to plan that, with that using communication devices like spots and inReaches, where we're out of that cell range, right? How do you use those devices and organize kind of a search and rescue plan for that? So that's a big kind of change in the way that we're training someone in those courses. And I do that with the Red Cross now. There are a number of organizations that do it across Canada. I think Red Cross is a pretty good, look to it. A big brand's been around for a long time. They do a lot of training, but there are definitely others out there. So you can just search, wilderness first aid and find, other local resources that are kind of close to you. And there's 3 levels to that. So there's like a 2-day course, which is either called wilderness first aid or remote first aid. And that's a good intro level. You're going to get a bit of everything, get a good feel for it. If you want to do more, there's what's called the wilderness advanced first aid. That's a 4-day course. You're getting a lot more practical application of the skills. So really in the 2-day, we give you a lot of knowledge. You might do it once and then the course is over. In the 4-day, it's like we do all that and we do long scenarios, and you actually get to play out that and put that into some critical thinking.
Right.
And then our wilderness first responder is the 8-day course. And that's really where you're getting into you being a search and rescue kind of team member, or you're going to be running a rescue. So it's a lot more kind of that team dynamics, how to run a rescue, how to build a big kind of first response kit, how to use some of the more advanced stuff like oxygen and airways, and how to apply those to patients. So that's kind of how that training works. Is there's definitely different levels to it, and usually you can bridge from one to the other. So
that's what I was going to say. Yeah, start off with that 2-day course, which would probably do for a lot of people like myself.
100%.
Just outdoor enthusiasts. And when we're talking about this, we were up in the Alpine, and we were 2 hours from the nearest town that had any service for first aid, and half the time with shortages right now, half the time that emergency room is closed. So it's another hour to Kamloops, and so we're looking at a 3-hour thing. So I mean, like you say, nobody's going to be out there fast. So you got to learn how to take care of these wounds and splints and simple things like that. Now, one of the things that we were talking about is one of the big things to come out in first aid in the last 10 years is tourniquets. And tourniquets, from my understanding, if you don't know what you're doing, can actually cause a lot of problems. If they're too tight, or apparently I just learned yesterday that and I may be wrong on this, but I was told that you actually have to release them every once in a while just to keep the blood flowing a little bit. Is that correct?
It's interesting. Yeah. So tourniquets, like you said, came kind of back into mainstream play in the last, 5-10 years. And they've been introduced into courses. And I think with that has come a lot of confusion, to say the least. Some good myths to dispel. Like tourniquets in general are amazing devices when used properly. So, the big thing is the tourniquet's used for an arterial bleed. And that's really kind of the main thing. So that's you're spurting blood. You've cut a big artery somewhere deep. And it's only for limbs. So you can only use it on an arm or a leg. In terms of their application and survival of the limb, the newest research is showing, these can stay safely on for up to 6 hours.
Okay.
So that's a lot longer than I think people were told of. I've heard people say after 10 minutes, you're going to lose your hand. That's not true at all. You've got a lot of time. Surgeons are pretty good about this. The release thing has been something we've kind of toyed with back and forth in different curriculums. And the challenge with that, I think, in a remote setting is you're weighing this risk of losing blood versus the limb. So if you're releasing, you are losing blood with that release, and you are theoretically maybe getting some circulation to that limb. But the risk of losing that blood is definitely going to outweigh any recirculation of the limb benefit. So the latest research has shown, or the curriculum ideas in a wilderness setting, is if we apply a tourniquet, which is the fastest way to stop bleeding. So that's an advantage, right? In the States, this is a much bigger thing than Canada. It's slowly coming into practice here because in the US, they do a program called Stop the Bleed, which is a public run campaign to train everybody how to apply tourniquets and that. And that's, due to the nature of having more severe civilian trauma events there.
Right.
We don't have as much of that public training here in Canada yet, although I would imagine that is coming. And their recommendation is if you have a tourniquet and there's severe bleeding, just throw it on. And that's totally acceptable, right? EMS response, fast way to stop bleeding. It's a very easy device to use once you know how to do it and you've been trained on it. And it has low risk if, taken off in the next, 4 to 6 hours. So for most people, getting to a trauma center in an hour, that's not an issue.
Right.
In a wilderness context where that may not be feasible, getting them out in that time frame. The biggest kind of thought is if you've applied a tourniquet just to stop bleeding quickly, what you can do in the next amount of time now is to go to the actual wound site and try to manage the bleeding at the site. And we teach a lot about wound packing, where we're actually like packing into a wound to apply that directed pressure. So what you can do, or what most of the recommendation is, it's within that first hour of tourniquet application, if you can get a really good wound packing and control of pressure on the site, you can attempt to release the tourniquet. If there's no bleeding, then you've managed it in a lower risk way. If it keeps bleeding, just put your tourniquet back on and leave it.
Right. Okay. That all makes sense. When you think about it, that blood loss is a bigger concern
100%
than limb loss, because if you lose a lot of blood, you may not have a life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, and you can't get blood, right? We can't do that in the field, and we can't train people even to do IVs. So, I mean, that's a big restriction. So I'd rather live than lose my arm, right? And that's kind of the idea of that training, is that we use this life over limb phraseology to it.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Going back to another situation and something that we were talking about yesterday when we were out was burns.
Yep.
Usually, like if you burn yourself on your stove at home, you run cold water over it, or you go to the fridge and you grab your frozen peas and put that on, right? In the wilderness, you don't always have the opportunity to have cold water or something cold there to put on the burn. In that case, what do you recommend doing with that?
Yeah, so you're right. Burn management, definitely the number one treatment is cool the burn as quickly as possible. So we should always have water of some point that we're going to drink, because we kind of need that to live. It doesn't matter if it's super cold, because your body temperature is, roughly 37 degrees Celsius. So anything, less than that is going to be cool, which is great.
Yep.
Colder would be better, but you use what you got. And I would just, submerge whatever it is, ideally in water. So if it's like a finger or something, you can just stick it in a water bottle. If it's something larger, you can make a bigger container with a garbage bag or a Ziploc and kind of fill that to get like a foot in or something. Or soak like clothing, some sort of cloth in water and kind of apply that to the area. But that's the biggest thing with burns. Is the quicker you cool it and the longer you cool it initially, they say 10, 15 minutes of cooling at least, the less chance of the burn progressing in levels, because we're kind of like a big steak. So the theory of cooking steaks is you want to put it on the barbecue and take it off before it reaches that level you want, because it keeps cooking on the plate, right?
Right.
And we're the same way. You have that exposure to the thermal heat. Once you remove your skin from that heat source, you are still cooking. So if you leave it, you may take what was a superficial burn and it may progress to a partial thickness. Whereas if you cool it, you can stop that progression, and now this injury is not as severe. So that's that biggest thing, is cooling it with whatever you got. And it doesn't even have to be clean water. Infection is not our first concern. So, if there's a puddle nearby and that's it, then stick your hand in the puddle. You just need to cool that thing as best you can.
Now, something else that just popped into my mind, a lot of us outdoor enthusiasts enjoy the wilderness at all times of year.
Yeah.
And in the wintertime, there's the threat of, cold and hypothermia and stuff like that. And I'll be flat out honest with you. I don't really know what to do in the case of the hypothermia because I try and avoid cold.
Yep.
I'm not a huge cold person. So, but I mean, there's instances where, we've been out four-wheeling and doing some snow wheeling and that, and maybe, or doing snow, like I do a lot of snowshoeing actually. So if something does happen in the case where you're starting to get into some of the hypothermia, what are some of the steps that you should take to help alleviate that or to get you back to safety properly?
Sure. Yeah. So number one would be on the prevention side. Dressing in layers is the biggest thing in winter because, like you say, you're on and off snowmobiles or ATVs, or
Yep.
you're hiking, then you're stopping. So your heat level is going up and down. And if you're just wearing like a t-shirt and a Canada Goose jacket, you don't really have a lot of options of what you're going to wear here. So having multiple layers where you kind of start with something next to the skin that's going to have a heat retention property when wet. So that would be wool or polyester. Kind of the worst thing to wear is cotton because cotton holds moisture, but it has no heat retaining properties when wet. So really avoiding cotton is a big one. And then having, layers on top of that, like a fleece kind of jacket, some sort of sweater, and then some sort of windbreaker on top. And then you can flip back and forth to allow that kind of sweat and moisture to get out. Because a big thing that's an issue when you're cold is being cold and wet. Because wet skin is going to steal heat much faster than dry skin. So that's the big balance, is you need to stay dry. So that would be the biggest thing, is kind of dressing for it. The other big kind of factor in winter is that we burn a ton of calories keeping ourselves warm. So your caloric demand is significantly higher. So making sure people are bringing lots of extra food and snacks, that's going to be really key. So your body can actually create the heat it needs to create. Because that's another way you're getting into hypothermia, is you're running out of calories and you can't shiver, you can't create that heat. That's going to be our big issue. So drying calories are kind of your biggest prevention. With that, some things to think about, I mentioned packing extra food and snacks, also extra dry stuff. Because if someone like we in Ontario do a lot of like winter camping here over lakes and things, right, where we're, walking over lakes, snowmobiling over water. If someone goes into the water and we get them out, we need a way to get that wet clothes off and get them into something dry. And we can prevent hypothermia really quickly with that. We've had multiple cases of people going through water, and you get them out, they strip everything down into dry stuff, and they never get hypothermic. Right. And that's going to be much easier than trying to dry out wet clothes with it on them in that exposure piece. So I think kind of prepping for those pieces is really key. And then it's watching your group is a big thing too. Like hypothermia isn't an immediate thing. It's a slow progression. And especially with someone that hasn't had an acute exposure, like they've fallen through the ice, just being exposed to cold over time, it's going to be a slow progression. You're going to pick up on signs of people being, uncomfortable, having shivering, loss of feeling in their hands and feet. So if we're starting to see those things, we need to deal with it then before letting it kind of progress to that level of hypothermia. I think that's a really key thing, is that group dynamics and kind of watching people and making sure everyone's prepared. Because maybe you as the group leader, like you've done this trip 100 times, you know what you're doing, you dress properly, you have all the right gear, and you take some newbie that's wearing the cotton t-shirt and the Canada Goose jacket from Toronto, right? They're going to have some issues. So we want to make sure we're on top of that and kind of, gearing our trip to kind of our weakest link to make sure that we're not going to have that issue. Because preventing an evacuation is significantly simpler than now having to evacuate them off some remote snowmobile trail. It's going to be much harder, right?
Yeah, I know. Like I always, in the wintertime, in my vehicle, I always pack a spare set of clothes in my vehicle at all times. And usually if I'm out snowshoeing, if I'm snowing, obviously I've got the clothing there. If I'm out snowshoeing, I'm going to be within an hour or 45 minutes of my vehicle. So chances are, even if I do get wet at that farthest point, I can start making my way back to get those, those clothing, stripped down and turn the vehicle on and go from there, get some heat going. Yeah. A lot of times people don't think of keeping extra clothing with them at all times. So,
And pieces like an emergency blanket is a really key one. Like
yeah,
that situation you mentioned of kind of walking back for an hour, if you had an emergency blanket wrapped around you, at least the wind is not hitting that cold skin and clothes, and that's really going to help. So that's a small portable thing you could think about throwing in like a day pack or smaller hikes. And
that's
they
a
make
really good
those in
idea.
terms of sleeping bags too, that you can actually like
Yeah.
get into if you were stuck there overnight. At least you got something nice,
Yeah.
small portable backup.
And they're relatively inexpensive as
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
right? You know,
100%.
you go to Canadian Tire and there's 3 or 4 different versions.
Yep.
In my vehicle, I actually have a big backpack that it's sort of like a get out bag kind of idea, right? And I've got blanket and I've got the sleeping bag one in there, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about is a get out bag that keeping in their vehicle at all times.
Totally.
Inside of there is change of clothing. There's food, there's water, and your basic first aid stuff in there. And especially myself, because I am out in the outdoors a lot by myself, you never know what can happen, right? So there's energy gels or energy bars in there. There's always water in there. There's spare clothing. There's fire starting stuff. And, I think a lot of people don't really think about that as much as they should. So going back to the training, I know that obviously, if people in BC they can search and find wilderness training, or BC or Alberta, they can find it wherever they live. But I know that you do that as well. And what is the website for your training company?
Yeah, it's Hard and Fast CPR is our training side. You can also get to it from the Wild Med Kits site. There's actually a tab that says
I think it's
under the About Us.
So.
Yeah, you can click courses and that redirects you to the Hard and Fast site. So that's our training side of the company. And then we do private courses as well. So we travel across Canada doing courses. If people have a group of 10, 12 people, then sometimes that makes sense monetarily to do it that way. Or if they just want to contact me, I have a number of instructors I've worked with over the years across Canada. So I'm always happy to, direct someone to a reputable course kind of nearer to them if I'm unable to provide that as well.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point about doing a course with a group of 10, 12 people, whether it be a 4-wheel drive club or a quad club or a snowmobile club or hiking club or whatever. I think it's definitely worth an investment. And that's something I definitely want to get happening in Kamloops. And just the fact that I'm out there and hopefully I'll never have to use it. Same thing as a first aid kit. Hopefully you never have to use it, but there's nothing worse than not being prepared for those emergencies. So
yeah.
Going back to your kits, one thing that you've come out with recently that really interests me is your kit that goes onto the headrest, a quick release kit that goes, a quick release bag that goes onto the headrest. And that's one of my biggest issues is I don't have a lot of room. I've got a lot of junk in my vehicle and and I've got to go through, do some reorganization. But one of the big things with the first aid kit and fire extinguisher really is you want to have those things readily available so that not just you can grab it, so that anybody can grab it, anybody can see where it is. Because if you're hurt and then you go like, oh yeah, I got to pull this out of the way and pull that out of the way, you may not be able to describe to them exactly where your first aid kit is. So you want that first aid kit and fire extinguisher both readily available that anybody can see and anybody can grab. And that one that goes onto the headrest, the quick detach, it's held with Velcro basically, right?
Yep.
So they can quickly grab that. And I really like what you mentioned earlier to me off air is putting it on the passenger side headrest on the back of it, which is where I was going to put it. But what I hadn't thought was that you mentioned that you can just quickly, if you're driving, you can just, obviously stop, but you can quickly reach across and quickly grab that without having to go around the other side of the vehicle or, dig it out. And I think that's something that, that's probably the way I will end up going when I do get a kit from you and you mentioned that you are working to having you got the bag separately right now, but you are working towards having a kit, a whole bag complete with all the pieces that you need in there.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. I think visibility of a kit's a big thing. Like you can go online on Amazon and people love to buy like CAD pad or camo or black tactical stuff, but it doesn't make sense because nobody knows to look for a little black pouch that could have whatever in it. So we try to really stick to the high vis, like red, orange colors that are, quick and easy to spot, having some sort of, first aid cross on it to identify that it's medical, because it's not really a product you want to be hiding. And as you mentioned, maybe it's you that's injured, right? If you're the one that's injured, somebody else may be grabbing your gear to use for you. So you want to make that not a hidden secret in your stash as well. With that kit, with the whole like stocking it. So we actually built on our website, which we're pretty proud of, is our build your own kit function.
Right. Yes.
So that's something people can do, is they can actually choose that bag, and it kind of leads you through step by step, thinking about each, category of first aid, where you can really go through and kind of pick gear that you think is going to work. And we've tried to modularize a lot of things. So there's, a bandage refill kit, there's a burn kit, there's an eye injury kit. So everything's very kind of detailed into exactly what you need and quick grab and go things. And all of those kits actually have instruction guides on the back of them. So they're good kind of quick reference material, as well as you had mentioned previous, our reference guides as well. I think that's a key thing to have is.
That's something I noticed on your website that I thought was a brilliant idea, is these small little quick reference cards.
Yeah.
I believe they're laminated.
Yep. Yeah. They're like a plastic credit card.
Yeah, exactly. And just these quick reference guides, because going back to, you may be trained up, you may know everything in the world there is to know about first aid, but you may be passed out. So somebody that may not have the experience can look at these quick reference guides.
Exactly.
And they're sort of simple and basic, at least trying to help the person go through and get what needs to be done. Whether they have your kit or not, that's something that everybody should have in their first aid kits, is these little quick reference guides. And the other thing too with that is that some people don't handle pressure as well. So it may be easier just to look at those quick reference guides instead of, and I think that, handling under pressure is probably one of the most important and key things in a first aid situation is, take a deep breath and assess the situation. And I know that's what is taught in first aid courses. Take a big breath, assess the situation, and go from there. Those quick reference cards are, I think, a brilliant idea.
Oh, that's great.
Really, really good idea. One of the other kits that I noticed on your website is a pet kit.
Yep. Yeah, so we developed this kit with a friend of ours that owns a service dog training company in Petawawa. She works with a lot of military members. So we did a lot of research with this and worked with some vets out of Guelph University that I've worked with before, kind of developing this kit. So it was really designed to, you can either clip it to like your leash and carry it. It's nice and portable.
Yep.
Throw it in your pocket. It's a pretty simple design. And it's got all the basics for treating main injuries you would run into on a walk, as well as a quick kind of reference first aid kit is actually built into that too, specific to pet first aid. And we did a lot of research developing that guide to make sure it was kind of in line with what is acceptable, veterinary practices these days. So it's a nice little small kit, and then part of the proceeds from that kit also go to support the service dog training company.
Well, that's great. That's great. Yeah, that's something I actually hadn't thought about. You're not going to throw a Band-Aid on your dog's paw. Idea, right? So it's something I hadn't really thought about, that animals or pets are different than us, and therefore they require different first aid help, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about your subscription boxes.
Sure.
That's something I saw on the website that I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, we developed these over a nice little COVID time where I was at home a little bit more than normal, and subscription boxes were, the big thing at the time. I done a lot of research into them. I think, like everyone else, it's always exciting to get, some sort of mystery package, and there's obviously a lot of hype around that. And I had lots of friends that bought into different boxes, like Battle Box or bespoke ones or whatever they are. And I wanted to kind of look at something more niche towards what I was doing. And I think what we really found is people buy a first aid kit and then they never look at first aid stuff again, and they just leave it forever. But first aid stuff expires, it goes bad, especially in vehicles. Like that adhesive is only going to last, a couple of years before it sort of dries out. A lot of that paper packaging eventually breaks down. things exposed to water get moldy when left in a bin or a closet or the garage
Right.
after a year. So you need to replace stuff. They're just consumables. So we wanted to build a kit that allowed, those that have a first aid kit, this is still going to work for them. And we really built it around this design of every kit would come with more first aid equipment, so you could restock or build a new kit. It would have some sort of specialty item in it or like a refill kit for your own kits there. It would always have a bag, case, or pouch, so something to kind of add to your gear. We
Right.
have some really nice patches that we've included, like hook and loop patches, which I think a lot of people are into, either
Yep.
collecting or adding to bags and that kind of piece. And then we've linked in preparedness as well. So we always have something kind of survival related, which is really, on the cusp of first aid. And when we get into, like you were mentioning, that shelter and fire, that's really part of wilderness first aid, because you're going to need to survive in order to be
Yep.
alive out there as well. So we've kind of mixed that in. And then we always include a reference guide or piece of material. And we've been doing a blog post each time we release it. So we're trying to really
Okay.
mix that education with product to
Yep.
provide some kind of on the go quick reminders or, new ways of doing things to really mix in that education and supply. Because I think the two marry really well together. And I think a lot of people have, bought stuff that they don't really know how to use, but look cool. I've definitely been bad at that in the past.
Yep.
So I think having some instruction on that is really helpful, that you can watch a quick video, read a quick blog, just as a good reminder of how that stuff works.
Definitely thinking about people buying stuff that they don't know how to use. I mean, obviously, going back to the whole training thing, but a couple of years ago, I was out with some people and we're doing a short little hike we're four-wheeling, but we did a little side hike, and somebody banged their head on an overhanging rock.
Right.
And we got back to the vehicle, and one of the other people I was with brought out this trauma bag, and it was a big red bag, and it had so much stuff. And I'm looking at it while he's treating this person, and I'm like, I have no idea what half this stuff is, kind of idea, right? But obviously that person knew what he needed at that moment to help the injured person. And I think, so obviously somebody going out and buying a, $300 or $500 trauma bag, if they don't even have some of the basics, is obviously a little bit of overkill, but that bag looks cool kind of idea. And it's like, well, let's spend some time learning some of those basics and go from there. One of the things I did notice on your website that I thought was really, really neat, going back to your products, is on every page, or a lot of the pages, if there's a first aid kit, or if there's you'll have a video explaining what's all in those kits. And I thought that was really neat, because I mean, pictures are great and wonderful, and you've got lots of pictures, but doing that video, you can actually see in a 3D kind of way of what's in that kit. And I found it a lot more relatable, and I thought that was a really good idea doing that way. So
Perfect. Yeah, we've been really happy with doing that. I think same thing for me when I was looking at first aid kits back in the day to advise people is you can't really see what's in them. Like, you're just looking at a bag. You go to Canadian Tire and they have some adventure first aid kit, but you don't really know what's in it, how it's laid out, like what's in there, why it's there. So that's why we really developed those videos, and we'll keep those going as we develop new kits as well, because I think those are quite helpful.
One of the nice things about going to with a company like Wild Med Kits is it's quality stuff as well. You take a look at the Costco stuff or the Canadian Tire stuff, and they got Band-Aids with cartoon figures on them or whatever, right? Like, it's going to a company, a reputable company like yourself, that has actual quality products. Everybody should have a first aid kit, obviously, at home. And we've all got boxes of half empty boxes of Band-Aids. But we should put that into one container and have that ready for anything. But especially with us being out in the wilderness, quality product will definitely make a big difference for sure.
Totally. So. And all of our suppliers, we use the same suppliers as hospitals in Canada. So we have relationships, and that's where we get everything. So all of our stuff is, Health Canada approved products. It's all vetted, and we're making sure that we're not putting bad stuff out there. And, I think especially in the tourniquet realm of things, like, you can go on Amazon and buy a lot of things that look like the real thing, but they're not always the real thing. So it is, yeah, it is good to know that you're getting stuff from a reputable kind of brand, and it's not a fake item or something that's going to break on you or
Yep.
not going to really work.
Yeah, exactly. What is some things that you think a lot of people are missing in their first aid kits?
Yeah, sure. So I would say number one is a triangular bandage. Honestly, out of all the like cool little nichey things, and I've looked at a lot of the kits, Walmart, Rexall, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and none of them have a triangular. The amount of things I can do with the triangular bandage is almost endless, right? I can create a tourniquet out of it. I can create a pressure bandage. I can splint you with it. I can sling you with it. I can, stabilize an injury with it. There's just so many things you can do with it. It's such a versatile item that weighs just about nothing.
Yeah.
That I think everyone should have at least 2 or 3 of those in there because it's such a versatile item in treating everything from bleeding to splinting, or even just having extra cloth that you could soak in water to treat a burn. Like there's so many things you can do with that. I'd say that's one of my top items that, I like things that can do multiple issues. So a triangular bandage is really good. I'd say another one is an elastic wrap. So people often heard of the brand like Tensor would be the most common thing. You think about like a sprained wrist or something.
Yep.
Those are great. They work really well for attaching splints. They work great if you have someone that has a sprain injury. They also work really good for creating an improvised pressure dressing. So when we look at, things like the Israeli bandage that are quite common in the military, you can improvise that very easily with an elastic wrap. So that's another one that serves a pretty big purpose. Like when I'm looking at a first aid kit, I want to have like Band-Aids and things I'm probably going to use because I'm going to need that. But you also want to have stuff that is really difficult to improvise if you don't have it. And bleeding control is something where if you don't have at least some stuff to kind of work with, it's really difficult to improvise. It can be done, but without practice, you're not going to be as fast at it, and it's not going to be as successful as having some of those products in there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Both of those are great examples. One of the neat things, like you mentioned earlier, that you guys sell is replacement stuff. So not just the full first aid kits. You've got empty bags, you've got full bags, you've got replacements. So if people want just a replacement of the Band-Aid stuff, or if they want to upgrade so they don't have anything for their burn stuff, or they don't have some of the more advanced stuff, or not the more advanced stuff, but their Costco kit doesn't have everything they need.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's one of the really things I really, think that people should definitely have a look at your website at wildmedkits.ca and just have a look through there, because there's so many interesting things I've found on there that sometimes I hadn't really even thought about. Right. So,
and that was the idea, is we really took a lot of this from our research and going through, every curriculum out there. Like I'm referencing all the latest wilderness textbooks on medicine and EMS guides. And I wanted to kind of take all that information and make an evidence-based approach to each of these things. Like if you had an eye injury, what should we actually be doing about an eye injury? And what do you really need? And that's what really sparked building these little kits. Like everything is kind of either nichey or very targeted. Like we have a wound irrigation kit, a wound closure kit that has all the stuff you need for wound closure, which does not include sutures, which people should not have out there because you're not trained to do it. And it's so painful and they're just unnecessary. There's, more simple ways to do it in a non-emergency.
Create more problems than it's worth.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone always asks me to sell suture kits. And I'm like, you don't want a suture kit. So, yeah, I think the little refill kits are great. And with all of our kits out there, like I said, we have videos, we have lists of content. So sometimes shipping doesn't make sense if you're buying a small thing. We're happy to have that information out there. So if people want to build their own kit, copying our kind of kit content, we're very happy to at least spread that education. So, for little things, I'm totally happy with people just using this information and building their own. If that makes sense, then go for that. We're happy to share that information.
Yeah, it may not be worth shipping a $20 kit across the country, right? But definitely, I think, the education, like you say, is a huge part. And I do recommend that people check your website out, not only for the education, but for, if you're looking at, hey, I do need a new kit. You guys have got some really neat kits out there, especially the wilderness kits.
Yep.
And I think those are what, a lot of us should have in our vehicles. Obviously, the basics, because, right now I've got a little $10 kit that I found in my garage kind of idea, right?
Yep.
But going to that tearaway kit on the headrest, I think is, the way that I will end up going myself.
Great.
But even looking at your website, like I say, all the videos of each, kit, I think was a great idea. Cause like I say, you can see it 3D. And like you mentioned, people don't want or aren't going to buy it, at least from you. At least they'll have an idea what they do need to buy.
Yep.
Because, sometimes the shipping is more than the product, right? So,
yeah. And like we do free shipping across Canada over $2.99. So if you're hitting a bigger price point, or you want to get a couple people together and do a group order, sometimes that makes sense.
Yep.
And even our shipping below that is a flat rate of $25. So that's just good for people to know, is like, that's all we charge. Shipping is very upfront. It's pretty easy to think about budgeting into, and we try to make that simple across Canada.
No, that's fair enough. Is there anything that you feel that we missed in this conversation? I think it's a great conversation to begin with.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you do feel that we missed?
No, I think we hit a lot of it. I also went ahead and made a discount code for any of your followers as well. So
beautiful.
That would be 4x4 Canada. So 4x4 Canada, and that'll do 10% off anything on the website. So that should help people out, budget wise. And we're happy to provide that discount code across for anyone. And then feel free to email me as well. There's a contact us page on there. So if people are on the fence of like, which kit do I choose? And they want to give us a little story of kind of where they're using it, what their background is, we can really help kind of steer them in the right direction to pick, the best product for them in their environment.
Yep. Excellent. You guys also supply a lot of more advanced product as well too. So whether it be, for search and rescue teams or whatever, there's a lot of product on there that I thought was quite interesting that, other organizations that may not know about you, if you are on a search and rescue team or something like that, definitely worth, looking at Wild Med Kits, because there's a lot of product on there that is for the more advanced people.
Yeah, 100%.
Go to the website at wildmedkits.ca and 10% discount at checkout. The code's 4x4 Canada, which is great. I really appreciate you doing that.
Of course.
One of the last questions that we do ask all our guests is, what Canadian would you like to listen to on the 4x4 Canada podcast?
Sure. So from a medical background, I would choose a medical person. My choice would be Ray Wiss. He's a physician out of Sudbury. He actually wrote a couple books. One's called Fob Doc. And he was a military physician that served some time in Afghanistan. He developed a lot of techniques and things for austere environments for like forward operating bases. So I think in terms of, having a physician mindset or discussing some more of those like medical practices in austere environments and discussing, how those more intense evacuations go, or thinking about especially international travel in maybe countries that are not as stabilized and how you might manage things in those ways. And he would be a really good resource for that.
Beautiful. Sounds like a very interesting guy. Definitely have to check him out for sure. Awesome, Ken. I really appreciate you coming on board. I know I learned a lot today, and I think our listeners will, learn a lot as well too. Again, it's Ken from Wild Med Kits, and you can check out the website at wildmedkits.ca. Don't forget the 10% discount for Canada at the end. And I really appreciate you coming on. I learned a lot today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Wes.